Pandemic is not a word to use lightly or carelessly. It is a word that, if misused, can cause unreasonable fear or unjustified acceptance that the fight is far from over, leading to unnecessary suffering and even death. Good evening and welcome. We wish you a very happy new year, and our fervent hope is for you to have a healthy as well as a prosperous year ahead. Tonight on the show, we discuss about one of the most spoken about topics in the year 2020. Our topic of discussion today revolves around COVID-19 and the fight against a global pandemic. Joining us tonight on the show are no strangers to Face the Nation. Let me quickly introduce them to you. Joining us tonight on Face the Nation is Mangala Ramdenia, Deputy General Manager, Media Spokesperson, Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. Also joining us tonight on the show is Dr. B.J.C. Pereira, Consultant Pediatrician, as well as the former President of the Sri Lanka Medical Association. Also joining us tonight on the show is Professor Atula Sumathipala, Chairman, National Institute of Fundamental Studies and Professor of Psychiatry, University of Kiel, United Kingdom. All joining us tonight on the show for the very first time is Dr. Ashan Patirana, Registrar Community Medicine, Health Promotion Bureau. Let's start off tonight's show with Professor Atula Sumathipala, Chairman of the National Institute of Fundamental Studies and Professor of Psychiatry, University of Kiel, United Kingdom. Professor, interestingly, there is a lot of issues that are being discussed about COVID-19 at present. We saw beginning March last year, COVID-19 has been one of the most contentious topics in the Sri Lankan fraternity as well. In your opinion, what are the lessons that we have learned in the last several months, and what are those reflections, taking them from that point onwards to the new year 2021? Your time starts now.
I think you touched an important thing. I really like the word reflection. We can't talk about the future unless we look back and think. So let me recapitulate what happened over the last 1 year very briefly. Now we remember, because it's very important to predict the future, we need to look back and reflect. Otherwise, we can't, predict things. And again, predictions are not 100% accurate. It's only an estimate, or in a way, it's the best guess. Now we remember the global pandemic started in Wuhan in 2019 November, and the first patient incidentally detected in Sri Lanka on 28th of January was a Chinese lady. And again, the COVID National Center for Prevention of COVID was started 1 day before the first patient was detected. Then we had our first patient on the 11th of March. In the first wave, we had only 3,000 patients with only 13 deaths, which was quite good. Then we had a period of, quite a good period of lull, not having any patients. We went through the elections, and that's a turning point which I want to talk about, because people became relaxed and thinking everything is over, getting settled. But then came the second wave, and unfortunately since October 9, 2019 up to now, we have had 44,774 patients, out of which nearly over 80% has actually got better. We have had only 213 deaths. Even one death is a death, I'm not undermining it's 213. But our figures compared to South Asia, the world situation, is not that grim. Then the most significant strength we had when looking back, we had an excellent health service in this country, particularly the public health service, with over 100 consultants in public health, community medicine, huge infrastructure in the country, hundreds of medical officers of health, thousands of primary health care workers. And then to combine with that, because previously we have not seen this type of a rapid epidemic or a pandemic, and for the first time we had to act faster. And I think the most important thing, that getting the defense forces to act along with health, I think that was the best strategic move in my opinion. And I remember coming to Sri Lanka on the 18th of March. I was quarantined myself So all the people who came from abroad was quarantined in government centers. And again, the other turning point, I too very vividly remember, a lot of people talking about test, PCR. But now the situation is, there's PCR testing, rapid testing, but we hear some people are avoiding testing. So we need to think, why? What has changed over the last 9 months? Again, I want to reiterate, these 44,000 patients were over 9 months. When we report these numbers in the media, when you say 45,000, it's a big figure. But the daily reports, we have to put things in context. And this, thinking back, a lot of things happened. Initially, everybody was quarantined in centers, but now we quarantine people in homes.
Professor, if I may, I just want to interrupt you because
Sure.
you spoke about two important things right at the start of your remarks. You said one of the best strategies adopted by the government was to get the military involved, A, and you said about people avoiding tests at present. The first wave, understandably, getting the military involved was the right way forward, for sure.
I didn't get that, sorry.
It was indeed the right choice or the right decision to take when the government got the military involved in the first wave, because you could make sure that you could quarantine one particular area and ensure that those individuals are housed and kept under quarantine, and then the pandemic as a whole was getting contained. But the second wave that you spoke about, which came after the August elections, in particular after October, did show that the military alone cannot fight this pandemic, and the people had to be really engaged. And then you spoke about how people were avoiding tests as a result of many issues.
Absolutely.
So this is not a point right now where the military could get involved, but the people themselves have to come out there and make sure that they adhere to strict principles of ethics and make sure that everyone in their vicinity or surrounding areas
Absolutely.
are well looked after.
I'm not saying military alone can do it. Definitely, don't get me wrong. What I said was, our health system was so good. Now, I remember my first post-intern job was MOH the Hiovita in 1980. Even at that time, we used to report, communicable diseases. It came by post. But we have a much better infrastructure now. But COVID challenge, we had to act fast. So when I was talking about military as an additional pair of hands in terms of getting intelligence, getting, to deliver facilities very fast, because I remember I was quarantined in the Diatalava camp. The services provided them in addition to the government health sector was excellent. So that was a very, very good strategic pairing of, two different things. I think that's the first in the world, except for Israel. And you mentioned very important thing. Yes, the first wave was, small relatively, and you mentioned the most important thing in this battle for future, engaging the public. They have to be partners. They have to be consulted. They have to be listened to. They should not be...
That cannot be done with the military involved, can it?
No, I don't agree with that. I mean, military do, but let's discuss about it. But I think people need to be, empowered, that's the word, empowered to be partners. They shouldn't be silent witnesses. It all boils down to a very important factor, that is, as a psychiatrist and behavioral scientist I know, the way people think determines how they feel and behave, irrespective of whether they are politicians, policy planners, service providers or the public. So all these straight out of the society think differently, they feel differently, they behave differently. So it's very important. That's why we can discuss later where the communication strategies are so important, and that is why the people should be consulted and listened to, and it's a two-way communication. So we can't take things for granted. So now it's the most crucial stage right now where people has to play a much bigger active role. And again, as you correctly said, there are reasons why people are not engaging. One of the things is stigma. We can talk about it and how stigma affects not only the public, not only service people accessing care, but at the same time providing care by the healthcare forces as well. I'm sure my colleague from the Health Promotion Bureau will also be able to add. But I think, to me, the most important thing now, particularly what I want to concentrate, yes, reflection. You have to have courage. Sometimes, it's not a blame game or trying to find fault. In my personal opinion, our health services has done extremely well, but there are things which can be improved. Media has done well. There are things which can be further improved. The armed forces have contributed their mighty, and there are things which can be further improved. The public played their role, but there are things which can be further improved. So that's the lesson we need to, it's a partnership.
Thank you very much, Professor Atula Sumathipala, Chairman of the National Institute of Fundamental Studies and Professor of Psychiatry, University of Kiel, UK. We now move our attention to Dr. Ashan Pathirana, Registrar, Community Medicine, Health Promotion Bureau. Professor Sumathipala hit the nail on the head, said we could not or we should not take things for granted at present. One of the issues that we saw during the first wave was the fact that because there was an election, the government itself was very hellbound to make sure that the pandemic was contained very well in Sri Lanka. However, right after the election was over, the government may have got its priorities wrong in terms of fighting COVID-19. In your opinion, Dr. Pathirana, do you think the government took things for granted, and as a result of that, they slipped and they skidded off the iceberg, and as a result of that, we are now in somewhat of a plunge?
Okay, so let's pick up from the common myth that has been circulating, saying we actually had the disease in the society, right? But we never reported it. Like, that's the accusation that's coming because of this whole election campaign, right? It was there circulating, but nobody really wanted to detect it or report it because it will adversely affect the election campaign. So let's look at it scientifically. So when we had the first wave, we had a particular strain of the virus, which was the original virus that came from Wuhan. Then the second wave started off with a D614 gene mutation. So it's called the D614G mutation. So when the first sero surveillance was done for the second wave at the Sri Jayawardhanapura University, they confirmed that all 16 samples that were checked from various places of the country were all D614G mutation, which was not there during the first wave. So we didn't detect a single mutated one during the first wave. So whatever that came in the second wave was a new entry. So what existed did not mutate in the same way that it happened in another country. So the D614G mutation happened elsewhere in the world. So somehow it came into the country. So therefore the whole relationship that we are talking about from the first wave to the second wave was not within Sri Lanka. So we do not detect that original virus strain any longer in Sri Lanka, but a D614G mutated one which is spreading faster due to the high viral load, but the virulence seems to be the same. So that is the main reason why we are having a bigger peak than the first wave itself. So yes, there is a part where the community at large, maybe even us, didn't change the way we communicated to people, because see, once we are...
Dr. Pathirana, if I may interrupt you. Now you said that the D614G mutation was something that was in another part of the world, and it came to Sri Lanka. So don't you think when you make that statement, it's not the people who are responsible, but it is the government inaction that is responsible?
Very good question. So we all think that the only way that people come into a country are through the ports of entry. Now, for example, look at the reality of Sri Lanka. Now, how many shipping boats are going into the uncharted territories and coming back? Now, how many Indian boats do we arrest every few months? We bring in Indian boats. So D614G mutation was widely spreading in India, and if we can keep track of all the boats that are exchanging in mid-sea, these are possibilities we are talking about.
But the cluster began from Minuwangoda.
Yes.
From a garment factory.
So there were 6 possible scenarios. So the first one we detected was from the garment factory, but to see that it's the same strain that was there in the Paliagoda fish market. So for now we still don't know patient zero, who the patient zero was, whether it started with the fishing community and then somehow got into the garment and we caught it because that's why the delay was, right? So the rapid testing was going on, but we were lucky to catch that particular lady, which actually contributed to see that she might not have been the first case. So because that was the first one detected, but when we are going down we realized that there have been, it's a bigger implication. That's why we started.
It was a bigger cluster.
It's a bigger cluster, and we were lucky to just pick up that case, and from there onwards we started going down. And a lot of people ask why we shut down at that time, and now we are not shutting down. See, it's to get hold of it, because once we catch one patient, we have to trace down the first level, second level, third level contact. So it takes some time for us to catch up with the miss. Right?
But
so
if you take a look at other countries, like, I'm not saying in any way or suggesting in any way that we have to go through a complete lockdown, but if you look at other countries, in particular Italy at present, it's under partial lockdown as we speak. Melbourne, Australia was on a complete lockdown for 3 months, and they were able to contain the virus, and now you can see all the rugby matches being played in Australia with a very big audience or spectators. So why the government didn't take that action is problematic.
Okay. So there are several things in terms of resources that enable us to crack down such a big outbreak. So the testing capacity of Australia, what they could afford to do and what we could afford, because we are doing quite well. We are having about 12,000 tests done daily in terms of PCR, and on top of that the rapid antigen tests as well. So the second factor is the population density itself. So in Sri Lanka, we are talking about a land mass that is 1/100th of the size of Australia. So if you can imagine the amount of disease spread that takes place in our context, where people are living in housing complexes, where if one person gets it, there are so many common utensils that are being used, and the amount of facilities and how people prioritize their health in Australia and how we see things, how our population looks at it, are quite different to each other.
So if starkly different.
Yeah, there's a stark difference, and we have to remember that they had to shut down for 3 months, a full shutdown, and the economic repercussions were very high for an Australian economy. So if we went for a full shutdown, a complete shutdown for 3 months or beyond, and we keep on doing that every time we get an outbreak, it's not going to be a viable solution for a country like ours. New Zealand can do it because it's got a 4 million population, and a landmass that's bigger than ours. And there are more sheep in that country than I.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asham Pathirana, Registrar, Community Medicine Health Promotion Bureau. You, of course, will get another opportunity as well when the Q&A begins shortly after the two speakers end with their opening remarks. I now move my attention to Dr. B.J.C. Pereira, consultant pediatrician and also former president of the Sri Lanka Medical Association. Nice to have you on board, Dr. Pereira. Interestingly, the eyebrow of the people of Sri Lanka started to raise a little bit further high after the first death of the infant was recorded in the country in terms of COVID-19. And how he or she was infected with COVID-19 is still a question mark, because we are, based on the reports that we have received, the mother of this particular patient in question was not infected with COVID-19. So my question to you is, how can a 17-day-old baby get COVID-19 and not the mother? So is there vertical transmission happening, or what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. I think technically and scientifically it's still possible. The way to look at it is that when you talk of vertical transmission, it is really transmission from the mother to the yet to be born baby. That's the real definition of vertical transmission. Then, of course, there is always a risk after birth through various means that the baby might get it if the mother still had the disease. But when you talk of 17-day-old baby who was diagnosed with a PCR, now that baby has been there in this world for 17 days. It's very unlikely that the baby got it from the mother as a vertical transmitted disease, because in that case the baby would have had developed some symptoms before 17 days, because when you look at the incubation period, that it does not fit into a time gap of say that long, 17 days, right? Now then the mother being negative again is technically possible, because the mother would have been tested sort of around the time that the baby was tested. So the mother has gone, sometimes it's possible that gone beyond the period where the PCR technically can be negative. So all these are possibilities. But then when you talk of a child who is 17 days old, everybody would think that the baby would have got it from the mother. But there is no definite sort of way in which you can say that, because the baby could have got it from someone else.
Yeah,
we don't know.
Dr. Pereira, now interestingly, we know that majority of the expectant mothers in Sri Lanka go to state hospitals to deliver their babies, and that is one of the only course of action they have because of the affordability at private hospitals. What steps must hospitals take, and what is your message to expectant mothers who are watching this show tonight, for them to not have that fear running in their minds that their baby was infected because of someone else being infected?
Well, it really depends on the steps that we have to take, the healthcare workers and the people working in the hospital.
Yeah, because you can't expect a 17-day-old baby to decide on what he or she has to do.
No, it's not the baby, but then to prevent cross-infections. I mean, this is one of the fundamental things that we all work on in healthcare, that at all costs we try our best to prevent cross-infection. That is a patient getting another disease from the hospital itself, right? All types of cross-infection. So now all the things that we do, the health advocacy that we have actually implemented so far through the Ministry of Health, are steps taken to prevent someone contracting this disease. Now, keeping your distance, wearing masks, washing hands, all that is geared principally towards prevention of the disease spreading from one to another. Right? So in the hospitals, all these things have to be implemented, and also that the other reason why even the healthcare workers use their personal protective equipment, the same thing. All these things are linked together. The baby of say 17 days or whatever, the baby would have got it a little bit before if it tested positive at 17 days, because there is an incubation period. It's really possible, it's only a possibility that I am talking of, that the baby could have contracted it from someone else. But then the baby was not in hospital at that time. All that time the baby was not in hospital. I don't think.
So initially, Dr. Pereira, when the COVID-19 pandemic really hit the shores of Sri Lanka and also other parts of the world, the focused group was the elderly. Those who have non-communicable diseases, and those were in the spotlight. Those individuals were in the spotlight. Even now as we speak, the United Kingdom has gone with their first rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine, Pfizer, for those who are 80 years and above. Infants being tested with COVID-19 and even leading to a death. Now this is also problematic, isn't it?
Yeah. The infant would have been tested because there would have been some symptoms which would have been suggestive. And nowadays people are, even the healthcare workers are so conscious of the possibility of the patient having COVID-19, that they would test the patient if there is any degree of suspicion. So that's probably why this baby was tested in the first place, that the baby would have had fever. But then come to think of it, that you're talking here of a newborn baby, a neonate, by definition is within the first 28 days of life. They are different when you talk of other children. And these infants, because most of the children who have contracted the virus, you find that the vast majority, almost something as much as sort of around 90 or 95%, are completely symptom free.
Asymptomatic.
Yeah, totally asymptomatic. And what you referred to about the elderly with other diseases, they are commonly called comorbidities now, that they may have one or two or maybe even more than that of a disease which is coexistent, so that when they get this, that they are at risk. Whereas in children, you don't have, at least as far as most children are concerned, you don't have that problem.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. B.J.C. Pereira, a consultant pediatrician as well as the former president of the Sri Lanka Medical Association. We now move our attention to Mangala Randeniya, a Deputy General Manager, Media Spokesperson of the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. 20th year at the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. Mangala, congratulations for sticking around for such a long time in the Bureau. So the opening question to you, being the media spokesperson as well as the Deputy General Manager at the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, is the fact that many allegations are now being leveled at the government, including your bureau, for not being able to get the Sri Lankan expatriate workers to return home safely with a minimal cost. Now, is this just an allegation, or is there any truth behind this?
Well, this is a really important point for us to discuss and widen the thinking pattern, as well as giving some the real correct factors for people to think about this repatriation process. Well, we know the migrant workers, the Sri Lankan migrant workers who wanted to come back after their completion of the contract period. So that is to be facilitated. And that was, so they started in 2020, and it is being still carried out successfully. The allegations and factors being discussed in the society by now is having certain backgrounds. So we want to explain those those factors for people to think even in the widest the way. So now there are about the 60 to 70,000 people still waiting all over the world, but when we confine to the Middle Eastern and East Asian region, it is almost 40 to 42,000 people still waiting to come.
Yeah, Mangala, you
by
spoke
now
about,
we have repatriated more than 30,000 the migrant workers.
Yeah, Mangala, you spoke about individuals or expat workers who have gone from Sri Lanka overseas for foreign employment. You spoke about one segment of them. Those are the individuals who have completed their tenure at their workplaces and are entitled to return back home. But there are individuals who have lost their job opportunities because of COVID-19 as well. Now, what they are saying is that the government is not allowing them to stay at government facilitated quarantine centers, but they are being directed to private hotel stays for quarantine.
No, that is totally wrong. Is misunderstood one. So the repatriation processing is being carried out initially only for the government free of charge quarantine places, and government did free of charge quarantine for everyone irrespective of their status, their capacities, and their the level of the capacities. Everybody repatriated, provided government quarantine. At the same time, there were a crowd or the professional and the eligible or
Who could
capable
afford.
people,
Yeah.
affordable migrant workers who themselves suggested to the government, well, they are ready to pay for quarantine and let them come on paid quarantine the process. So then it was introduced with the request of the people who made the request. Then what happened, while this government free of charge quarantine, the repatriation is being carried out, those flights also allocated for people to come. But so how are we going to the separate who can pay for quarantine for the hotels and who can't? That was voluntary statement. It depends on the voluntary statement. The individual who give the statement that they can pay for
No, but the allegation is, the
yeah,
the government
well, I'm
is,
coming to that point. Yes, the allegation is the based on the information. Of course, what they give. Those who some people, they have given their consent that they can pay for the hotel.
So I can give you a classic example.
Once they repatriated, then they started telling they can't go for paid quarantine.
So just 3 days
quarantine.
ago, 3 days ago, Newsfirst carried a voice cut of a Kuwaiti national who said that the flight from Kuwait back home to Sri Lanka is approximately around 250,000 Sri Lankan rupees. Now, that person who spoke on the media said that his salary is also around 40,000 Sri Lankan rupees. Then how can he afford a 250,000 ticket back home?
Fine.
The ticket prices are exorbitantly priced.
That's right.
Now we're talking about the migrant workers who are bringing in a revenue of $8 billion every year to strengthen the Sri Lankan economy. And when they are in need, the government is not stepping up. And I think that the onus falls on the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment as well.
That's what I am explaining, because this factor has to be clearly identified. Now, those who have completed their contract, the employer is the one who pays.
Yeah, that is one segment. Let's forget about that. But let's talk about the others who have lost their employment.
Right. Why some are not having the permanent or a designated employer? Why some are not having? Because they have not gone. Some have not gone on designated employer, like on a contract certified by the embassy and signed by the employer as well as the employee. So,
no, but that is cherry picking. Now, when they send money to Sri Lanka, it's okay.
Let me explain.
Yeah, it's cherry picking, because when they send the money to Sri Lanka, it's fine.
No, that is.
But when they are in need, it's not okay.
No.
Then all the rules and regulations are tabled and rolled out.
We understand the fact that everyone earning the money sent into our country is a foreign exchange, and that is to be calculated the foreign exchange
income. So then you all don't see the employment contract between the employer and the employee.
Entire nation is getting the benefit of using this foreign exchange, right? The whole nation, every Sri Lankan is getting benefit of, irrespective of the fact that they were legally employed or illegally employed. So the money that they send is calculated the foreign exchange. That's the correct fact. We understand it. But what I am telling, for the public and everyone who are interested to understand, where there is no designated employer means they have escaped the workplace, then they are in a deserted situation where they are not in a position to pay for the ticket. So that fact
what
is
happens
correct.
to that segment?
So for them, if they are registered with the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment at the departure, so they are compensated for the ticket. But there are people among those who don't have the formal designated employer, those who have gone on visit visas, they don't have even informal employers.
Right.
So what they claim that they also need to come. Wait for a while. Because since they also need to come back, they are also being facilitated through government passage. But the claim is this. Claim is those who have given their consent at the departure level, departure position where they can afford for government the paid quarantine, and once they are landed they say that they can't go for, because this makes lot of the complexities, like the,
So, Mangal,
what we request from the interested people and who want to come, don't make voluntary statement for paid quarantine. You always make your request for government free of charge quarantine. So
Right, okay.
we are ready to facilitate
that, okay.
and
Understood.
provide those facilities for those who really need.
Thank
so
you very
that's
much,
what we
Mangal.
are
So I want to
asking.
open the floor for questions from the
Sure.
journalists as well,
Okay.
because we are getting held up for some time. So on to my immediate right is Azra, on to my immediate left is Deshan, as well as Tarusha on my far left. Let's start off with the only lady today on the show, Azra.
Thank you, Shamir. I want to start from where we stopped. Mr. Randhania, we see tourists being brought back to Sri Lanka, state leaders coming into Sri Lanka, using the air bubble or the bio bubble concept. Why can't we use that? Why can't we apply the same theory to the migrant workers who are desperately waiting to come back to Sri Lanka?
Well, now even tomorrow we are meeting at the COVID National Center to discuss about the expeditation of the repatriation process for migrant workers. So we have made several suggestions. Even we were talking about how can we have alternative methods for people to get the quarantine. That is being discussed with the panelist, and the health expert will advocate or advise for the COVID center to do certain new things, like now normally the repatriation is done like there is a PCR test, mandatory PCR test. Those who are negative only being the boarded, and the negative people are coming to Sri Lanka, and they are post arrival the PCR being taken, and once so that is normally the results can be issued within 48 hours usually. So what we are suggesting, after issuing this the PCR test results, those who are negative, rather than keeping them in a government quarantine for 14 days, we can keep them for maybe 7 days minimum, and dispatch them to the households and to have exclusive home quarantine, and giving what do you call this, the detecting ban for that particular the repatriated migrant worker to be within the premises of a household, not moving anywhere. So something like that has been proposed, and that is being taken into the consideration of the COVID National Committee. We will see how will be the response for that particular session. Then we can expedite.
This particular alternative has been proposed.
That was proposed to the committee. Yeah.
Why is it taking time? I mean, this is not something new. We have done this.
Tomorrow we will have kind of the positive results for that one. Otherwise, expanding of the government free of charge quarantine places number of beds. So that is the main determinant factor for us to have certain controlled limitations for repatriation. By now, almost 500 to 700 people daily being repatriated from overseas, and they are being provided government quarantine, and who have requested for paid quarantine being dispatched for the hotels.
No, but you said, Mangra, that individuals are being compensated if they request for the process, because when they go out of the country, they can register at, there's a counter at the airport where they can register that they're going for foreign employment.
Yes.
And they have to mention the numbers and all that before they leave. So you said that they are eligible for compensation. Am I correct?
Of course, they are
so
eligible.
what sort of compensation does the government give in a situation like a percentage wise?
Usually,
if it's 250,000 Sri Lankan rupees that has to be paid for someone from Kuwait to come to Sri Lanka, what is the compensation that the government gives?
Normally, there is a mandatory insurance, the policy provided for the registered migrant workers.
Yeah.
At the time they are departing from Sri Lanka. So that insurance covers the premature repatriation air ticket cost. So that is the compensation, since they have the valid legal registration, and within that they are being compensated to meet the cost of air ticket, not the not the total cost, because there is a limit for the reimbursement of air ticket, but to a certain level that is being the reimbursed by the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment through the insurance policy.
Can I add to that?
Yes, Professor.
I think we are talking here about reflections. So I'm very careful to avoid blame games. Now you ask why such a long time. These are not just arbitrary decisions, because I can vouch, we sat in COVID center.
Yeah.
These are carefully taken decisions going through many processes. Now in 2019 October, I convened a think tank outside all this as a third eye evaluation of the whole thing, and I presented to the COVID center. They were very receptive. That's how the home quarantine came. As a result, actually we discussed about repatriations. Now what we have to be very careful, there's no one size fit all solution to bring back people from different countries, different social strata, and different levels of income. Now we also need to remember, when we talk about disasters, there are disasters, epidemic, pandemics, and complex emergencies. Now this is a complex emergency of a new sort, where the whole globe is affected, and the whole globe, the whole world has witnessed for the first time a novel complex emergency where non-communicable diseases and communicable diseases also have impacted upon each other, and this is very complex. So in such a circumstances, there are no quick fits. Now if there was a quick fit for Sri Lanka, I'm pretty sure these things have been fixed in UK and US and other places. So we need to accept the reality, and again when it comes to the solutions, I personally don't believe it's the sole responsibility of the government. When I came in, I was quarantined in Liyatalava. We were saying, everybody who came from Britain, we said we are ready to pay even for the government quarantine center, because it was our social responsibility. But the government stepped in, did it, and what we need to understand, the first few months of COVID, we had to react, and there was a very little time to plan, do things. Now things are evolving.
No, but at the end of the day, see, none or no one is trying to blame the government for what they're doing, but the buck has to stop somewhere. There has to be someone who takes the onus or responsibility for what is happening, and that is called accountability, and that is the role of the government in play, in power, isn't it?
Government is accountable for certain things.
Because the government can't wash their hands away and saying everything is hunky-dory, so henceforth we won't get involved.
No. Government has a responsibility. Government has a definite responsibility. At the same time, every level of the society, including individuals, opinion leaders, trade unions, the clergy, everybody, this is a national issue.
So I can give you a classic example, Professor. I want to give an opportunity to Tarush and Deshan also to pose questions to you. I just would give you one classic example. When the indigenous tonic that came into play just a couple of weeks ago, the first to test it out was the Minister of Health, and then the indigenous tonic was given to parliamentarians, and most members of the government or state machinery tested and tried out the COVID indigenous tonic. Now, is that the government taking action, or is that the government taking accountability?
I prefer not to talk about individual tonics or
no, I'm just kidding. Indigenous tonic. Let's generalize it.
Okay.
Let's not talk, but let's start off where the government failed here.
Not the government. The whole society has failed. I'll tell you why. I was coming to that issue.
Yeah.
Along with this, non-communicable disease, the WHO also calls about. I mean, he would be able to add. There's a thing called infodemic. What is infodemic? Deliberate disinformation and misinformation. And as I told you, different strata of the society think differently, feel differently, behave differently, and they also understand differently. So in a crisis situation, when things are very complex, it's very easy for this disinformation and misinformation to, disseminate through the society, sometimes inadvertently. So level of understanding, even the politicians are of different education levels, different faiths, different beliefs. So I'm not surprised about different ways of thinking, different ways of feeling and acting. And I mean, while parliamentarians did that, you know, there are certain individuals straight in the society who actually came up with the alternative ideas, thoughts, and challenging those. So it's a polarized situation where, and we, on one hand, we talk about democracy in a country, right? So that democracy is there. The unfortunate downside of the democracy is people have the freedom to say anything, write anything. Now, use
but not drink anything in public.
Media.
But not drink anything in public that gives way for individuals to believe that this is the way forward for Sri Lanka. Now that is giving misinformation that you were talking about.
Individuals have a responsibility for responsible actions.
So that is at the end of the day, that reflects from the health minister herself to the parliamentarians. I want to just quickly switch to Dr. Patirana on this. What is your thought, Dr. Patirana?
So one thing is, you said the politicians tried it out, and that was like a statement giving that, okay, we endorse this typical medicine. But at the same time, when you talk about the health literacy of a country, people did understand that there was a set of specialists, especially in the public health fora, who hold a different opinion about it. So it melts down to something. Is it the doctors and the public health specialists who are supposed to give the opinion to the people? Are they more receptive towards the educated, the doctor community and the people who have been looking after them for so long? Or is it that they are going to go with a herbal tonic, as Sir said previously? Anyone in this country do have the freedom to test what they want, but the media is such that they can capture what they do. But I don't think anybody came and said that, look, taking this medicine will cure you. I don't think there was an endorsement to that extent, but there were photos of people consuming it, and then, you know, like it was like a informal thing. So the thing is, yes, there like, people can interpret it in either way, but I don't think in any point in the health sector who are responsible to make these decisions about which treatment to be given and what not to be given has been consistently saying anything that is being prescribed in our scientific system needs to go through a thorough process of evaluation.
What are these processes?
So in what we practice, what we believe is that the best should happen to the patient. So for that we have what are called ethical committees, where they will review, when you even do a research, whether it fulfills the rights of the person who's actually undergoing this testing. So the first thing, before you do any test, you have to give an ethical review committee approval. So once you do that, to test a drug, it has to be a randomized clinical trial. So in order to do that, you have to have two groups who have been very well informed about the consequences and the possibilities and the dangers of this, and they have to agree that they might get the real drug or a placebo of it. And then you give the drug to both parties, and then you allow a certain period of time to pass. This is how we have tested the vaccines, right? So one group is given a placebo, the other group is given the real vaccine, and then you statistically evaluate whether there's a significant difference in terms of improvement in the two groups. So at the same time, you have, so a clinical trial goes through several phases just to see. First we try on animals, which is the stage 1, where we test whether there's any toxicity or any effects on the organs. It's done under very highly controlled environments. Then stage 2 on humans, that is also under very high controlled environments, where we are checking whether the liver function, the kidney functions, are these things.
But none of this was done on the indigenous tonic.
There you go. So that was the issue. So it's not that we can come up and say, look, nothing is working. But there is a process to ensure the safety. See, these things came long time ago. The Nuremberg Code came out after the World War to safeguard the rights of these people. So
I just want to add one thing. Now, the other issue here is overgeneralization. Now, say for example, this the COVID
yes, sir. The vaccine.
So the COVID vaccine, even if it is proved, if somebody says it would generate lifelong immunity, it's wrong, because we don't know, because it's not been used and tested for a long period to make that statement. What we can say right now is it is effective, but we don't know how long. So similarly, science is very clear. Even if we do studies, and again, because you asked about the levels of evidence, in our field, whether it's Western or whatever it is, there are what we call case studies. Say if you get a new type of a patient, new type of treatment, existing medication used, we did it, quinine was used for COVID at the beginning. And we report about case studies in rare things, and we do research. Sometimes one research paper wouldn't guarantee the absolute solution. Sometimes you get about 1,000 research papers, and we do a synthesized knowledge evaluation called systematic reviews. So the issue here is we have COVID only for 1 year, so we don't have evidence. And I used to say this, I evaluated 6 leading journals in the whole world in psychiatry to prove that only 6% of research come from 90% of the world. So we thought it was because psychiatry. Then we went ahead and evaluated another 6 journals, New England Journal, JAMA, Lancet, the top medical journals, to show again only 6% of research come from 90% of disease burdened countries in the world. We repeated that 20 years later last year. It has improved 20%.
So Dr. Pereira, you being the former president,
yeah. But with COVID, even that 20% of evidence is not there. So there's a huge vacuum. In such a vacuum, disinformation, misinformation has a place. So that's what we are witnessing. People think differently, people feel differently, people behave differently, and wrong messages are disseminated. So that's the only way I can. Sorry.
So Dr. Professor Sumantipala was talking about thinking differently, behaving differently, and also acting differently. So these have led to the problems at hand, where misinformation has come to center stage. However, we should not forget the fact that even the government had endorsed Dr. Pereira somewhat indirectly, not directly but indirectly, about the indigenous tonic that we're talking about. And as a result of that, the government even failed to get down or take proactive action on the COVID vaccine that is supposed to be rolled out across the world. Dr. Pereira?
Well, it's not only one compound that we are talking of, there are several that have been sort of, promoted. I think the effectiveness of any of these forms of treatment, as Dr. Patina quite rightly said, has to be proven scientifically, which has not been done so far. And also, when you say to be proven scientifically, you need to know exactly what compounds are there in this so-called medication that they are using, because it has to be compared either against another existing form of treatment which we don't have at the moment, or what is called a placebo, the one that hasn't got any active ingredients. So that for that to be synthesized, you cannot use any of the components that are there in this so-called cure.
So why can't the government go one step further, Dr. Pereira? Sorry for my ignorance, but I think the people would want to know why can't the government go one step further if they want to see whether this particular indigenous tonic works. Why not test it with a sample group? At least that could be the first step for a clinical trial. As Dr. Patirana just mentioned, he said that it has to be forwarded to an ethical committee first, and then has to go through statistical evaluations and then clinical trials. So why can't the government start that process? Rather than starting that process, why is the government testing a tonic in front of the eyes of the public to say this may work, this is the way forward, and not go for the vaccinations that are supposed to come into the country and go through a rollout process?
Yeah. What many people don't understand is that the entire process of evaluation and testing for any given compound for a disease goes through several phases, right? Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 minimum. Phase 1 is mainly animal studies. Phase 2 is a limited number of people being given this whatever the compound that you are testing, and phase 3 is very large numbers being given, thousands. So none of that has happened here. So we can't really talk anything very much about it, and certainly, I mean, I don't think as Western medical practitioners we can really talk quite clearly about these compounds without knowing what is actually in that.
So what you're trying to say is, as Professor Sumatipal said, education levels of those who are in Parliament also is somewhat of a big question mark.
Well, let me come in here.
Yeah.
I think it's again overgeneralization to say the government has done it. Certain individuals in the government has done it. We also need to correct, there is a clinical trial going on now after ethical approval from Rajarata University, which is the correct thing to do. And what we need to remember one thing, I think I'm very sort of on the middle in this one. Don't forget, we are a nation who had hospitals in the history, in the whole world, the first hospital in a country. We have surgical instruments, we have had all that. So that indigenous knowledge is there. So here the issue is not the indigenous knowledge or the Ayurveda or Unani. I am a firm supporter of doing research at different levels and testing these. Some of them may emerge as effective or may be proved not effective, and nobody should be against it. But the whole argument I make, forget about science, but don't forget about ethics, because ethics is very clear, do no harm. That's arising from Nuremberg trials where 7 doctors were convicted for doing unethical research, and now the standard is every person who is in a trial needs to know that he is in a trial, because there is this thing called therapeutic misconception where medication is given to somebody and that person thinks it's a treatment, but it's actually research. Now remember again, it's not only on traditional medicine or tonics this happened. Throughout the world, different people came up with even Western medicine. That is how this quinine came in. Now again, if there is a product already available for something, there may be clinical trials trying to see whether that is efficacious for this. Now the issue is, there are Ayurvedic scripts, ancient, registered, which can be tried. It should
but
be
Sri
tried.
Lanka has the first hospital in the world, understood, Professor.
Yes.
But we don't believe in varamas or the warrants issued by God.
No comments.
To to mankind, and as a result of that, we have to test and try out. Yes.
If I can
Dr.
just fill in on the vaccine that you said, like, you know, why we haven't, so that's one part of the question that you presented. So the reason why we have not yet, like, you know, got the vaccine, it's not true. We are actually in the process, and the evaluation committee has now submitted for the procurement. See, there are things that we need to consider. Like now, for example, one vaccine that was generated in Australia, they found that, you know, later on in the 3rd stage of clinical trials, that they get a false positive for HIV. Now that, if they have tried it prematurely, would have been chaotic, because see, once you give the vaccine, you become HIV positive, but not that you actually get the disease, it's a false positive. So the whole screening program for HIV would have been jeopardized with that. Now the strain in UK apparently is sensitive towards the vaccine that's developed by AstraZeneca, which would most probably be the vaccine that we get, because the logistics are much easier to handle. And now they are also saying the subtype that has been detected in South Africa, which has 4 mutations on the spike protein itself, which is the most important part, like on getting into the human cell, is actually questionable whether the vaccine would be effective. But they are saying within 6 weeks they can fix it if they detect it. So yes, there are so many things that are happening. And remember that Sri Lanka does not have the capacity to introduce like 5-6 vaccines. We heard that New Zealand has procured 4 vaccines. We don't have that capacity. Once we make that choice, we have to be really, really sure that we have got the correct one.
But Dr. Pathrana, now they are talking about a second variant also, and the closest India, they have already tested positive for the new strain of COVID-19. Whereas in Sri Lanka, we are still looking for a solution for the first variant. What if we get the second variant as well? Are we prepared to face this
But
issue?
also, I think Dr. Pathrana spoke about 2 variants. One was the first wave, and then D614G,
which we are having right now.
Right now, and now there is discussions about a third.
The B117, as they call it. So and the other one, like, so the one that, so the thing is, it doesn't have a high mortality. So the viral load you detect with the new strain seems to be higher. So the chance of transmitting it to another person is very high. So the spreading is accelerated, but it doesn't mean that the virulence is high. So the number of deaths have not gone up, even in England. But what they are worried about is the strain in South Africa, which we still don't know in detail, which they are not sure whether the vaccine would even work properly on it. So there are new things that are coming up. It's going to keep evolving. So we have to be ready and to be able to accept that fact that, okay, we might get one chance at a vaccine, and we have to make sure that it's the correct one. So a lot of people do accuse us even for dengue. Like, at one time there was a vaccine and people are saying, why isn't Sri Lanka getting it down? We are talking about dengue all the time. But we didn't, because once we did the zero surveillance in Sri Lanka and matched with the possible complexities we could have, we decided no, that vaccine will not work here.
No, but we have in the past, Dr. Patharina, we have experienced such vaccines coming into Sri Lanka, and we've done extremely well. One classic example is polio.
Yeah.
We've almost gone to the extent of going to that point of extinction of polio in the country as well.
So
we've done well.
We can go back to see how long did it take for them to develop that vaccine and how extensively was it tested. So the last vaccine that was developed faster than this was for Ebola, which took 5 years. This is done in less than 1 year, and it's actually, we are not saying that it should not be accepted, because this is an extraordinary situation. So, and depending on the impact of the disease, where in some countries they are reporting over 2,000, 3,000 deaths per day, and the economy is in turmoil, yes, they can take drastic action. Whereas we still have an opportunity to really study, because our logistics are also not the same as the other countries. So are you
trying to say that developed nations like the UK, US, Russia, China, Europe, India, our closest neighbor, Bangladesh, Maldives are getting these vaccines eyes closed because they want to use the people as guinea pigs?
No, because they can actually afford to give and go for a second vaccine, because see, you can give a vaccine after a vaccine, there's no problem in it, and you have to read about the other ones as well. New Zealand has ordered 4 vaccine types and they haven't given a single vaccine up to now. They are waiting for 6 months to evaluate the effectiveness, because there's what is called stage 1, 2, 3 and 4 post-market surveillance. See, some countries, they do take the measures. See, it's a decision you have to make. It's a pragmatic decision. While working in the field, you realize, I told you about the dengue vaccine, right? People were saying that in Singapore it was being given, and we were testing our own zero surveillance and we didn't give it. Whereas Philippines went ahead and gave it, and they are reporting higher deaths now. Because see, it's not as simple as like only one variety is there, you give it and it's cured. No, there are several types of dengue. Like once they gave it, in Philippines they had a real issue of, they had to really call back on the vaccine. So let's not go into situations like that. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but don't think that Sri Lanka is not doing anything. The reports have been evaluated and the recommendations have been submitted, and it's been done in a very pragmatic and a controlled manner.
Professor Atul, I would like to come back to you on this matter. You presented facts and figures earlier on. In the show, the number of deaths, the number of cases here in Sri Lanka, and you said that it's not grim at the moment. But however, 394 Ukrainian tourists landed in Sri Lanka a few days ago in batches, and 5 of them have tested positive for COVID-19. And however, this evening we received the news that the England cricket team came to Sri Lanka, and one of the players have tested positive for COVID-19 as well. Now, Ukraine is a country where it's double the population of Sri Lanka. 41.98 million people live there, and the total number of cases in Ukraine has exceeded 1 million, and 18,927 deaths have been reported in Ukraine as well. Do you still think that it's not grim in Sri Lanka?
For Sri Lanka, you mean?
Yes.
I do think, because again I want to link it with this vaccine thing. Vaccine is only one approach to tackle this emergency. To me, other public health measures are extremely important. Now, linking to the Ukraine thing, again remember, to me a strategy is capturing opportunity. And whether we like it or not, the whole world is going to live with COVID for the next 1 year or two in spite of vaccination, because to reach to eliminate a disease, you have to vaccinate at least 70% of the global population, which is going to take time. Until then, we have to live with it. Then there are two options people can talk about. Extreme option, close the whole world, not only Sri Lanka. It's not going to work. So people have to live with it. And in doing so, we have to try and do certain things which may work, may not work. So my reply to your Ukraine tourist is, take it as a pilot, review it. Sometimes the most important thing, even in future, we may have to do certain things to try and see which approach, which option would work. Whatever we do, remember, there are not 100% advantages, 0 disadvantages. We are not going to make the mortality or deaths to 0 in Sri Lanka, where thousands are dying in other parts of the world. We can only reduce. We are not going to make it 0 for people who get affected. The most important thing for people to realize, in Sri Lanka 70% get better with due care, right? And again, we very clearly know the deaths are from multimorbidity, as Dr. Perera said, and also in deprived communities. So to me, public health approaches are extremely important. One of the greatest strengths we have in Sri Lanka, I'm proud to say that. I work in England. Now I had 4 MD trainees who community medicine trainees who came to me over the last 2 years in Britain in my medical school, and we got them down to be trained from that end with PGIM money. But my university asked them to teach for our medical students there, because I'm not trying to give an undue inflation to the stature of, we have one of the world's strongest public health systems where other countries don't have. So let's concentrate, let's capitalize on our strengths, let's realize what are our weaknesses, because remember, in COVID, it's not only the health impact we have to face the social impact, and most importantly economic impact. And I'm sure he will add, while we try to prevent the COVID deaths and morbidity, people are going to die from maternal mortality, other diseases. So we have to have a good look at the big picture as a country, the future, education, health. So it's a challenging thing. I'll tell you, in a complex emergency like this, there are no perfect solutions.
I know, Professor Abdul, but you spoke about the bigger picture here, and now the entire world is shocked because of this new variant that was found in the UK. In your opinion, has Sri Lanka taken the necessary measures to prevent this new variant of the virus entering the country? Now, the England cricket team came to Sri Lanka today, and one person is tested positive.
You want to? That's been conducted in a bio bubble. So the whole idea, even SLPL was played in a bio bubble. The whole idea is you separate them from the rest of the country. So the people who get into touch with this crowd that is coming in will not communicate with the rest of the country. So we create a bio bubble, and within that, that's how the IPL was played, right? And that's how the SLPL was played.
But that bubble was not there when the Ukrainian foreigners were coming to Sri Lanka, because most of them are even now under quarantine.
No, that's wrong.
So that's
wrong. I totally agree with you. But to answer to your question, okay, so there are 2 strains now. There are, in different parts there are more strains. There are going to be future strains as well. So are we going to lock down the country forever, close our borders for any people to come? So not only Ukraine, not only English cricket team, we can't get down Sri Lankan expatriates then. So we have to stop all that. We can't. That's why I said we will have to do things with the highest possible standards. To me, the most important thing, the mask, distance, washing hands, and the IDH hospital have proved, as Professor Dr. Perera said, if we take the precautions, the correct things, we can minimize it. But still, from people who come from abroad, Sri Lankans, forget about where they come from, there may be cases. There may be cases. I mean, they do the PCR before they come, but they may have contracted the disease, and while they are here, they may be positive. So this England cricket team, the PCR was done there. So it is now positive. Then we have to take some measures, act, and prevent further spread, but we can't close the whole world.
Dr. Perera, just to add on to some of the discussions that have been happening so far, we speak constantly about how this is not a short-term issue and how this is bound to continue for the next year or two. We've had a very short-term investment into our healthcare sector when it comes to putting up additional capacity for quarantine, putting up additional capacity for treatment, all these facilities with 20-30 ICU beds for treatment. Over the next 1 to 2 years, you're going to have your dengue waves coming in. You're going to have other diseases also coming in. From your years of experience, given what is now an unprecedented situation, where do you see that the government as well as the health authorities need to divert their attention in terms of being prepared for the health challenges that will further complicate rather the COVID problem?
Well, I think we have already provided some of the answers. I think both Professor Sumatipal and myself about the role that has to be assigned to the health measures, the public health measures that should be taken. So I think the government has to go flat out for that. But having said that, now many people are saying that people are not obeying these health guidelines. Are you familiar with a expression called COVID fatigue, which a few days ago I wrote to the papers about? Now, when you talk of COVID fatigue, many people think that it's a physical effect of the infection. It is not. It is the mental effects of this and the way people behave after this. Now, the classic example is the first wave. Everybody fought tooth and nail to safeguard themselves and safeguard others as well on this. Then the second wave came. By that time, people were sick and tired of being told all these things about it, right? So that is the kind of fatigue that these people, and these are things that have been described now very well. Athula will agree that all over the world this has become the biggest problem now. In Europe, this is the main problem and one of the main reasons why it's spreading like wildfire. So now this is also brings us to some of the things that Professor Sumatipala said earlier, that we cannot point guns at these people and get them to do what we want them to do. We have to get them empowered. We have to they have to be convinced of the usefulness of this. So one of the important things that the government has to do is to make sure that the people will obey the health guidelines through conviction rather than by compulsion. Now, as I think Professor Tisavitharan, I think a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago, over one of these programs, said you cannot really point guns at a virus to start with, right? You cannot get it. So what the government has to do now is take steps to prevent as much as possible the importation of these viruses and especially the mutant strains. Now people are so worried about this mutant strain in England. Now, as Dr. Pathirana quite rightly said, that the strain is different because it has the tendency, even the Prime Minister of Britain, Mr. Boris Johnson, has said that we don't know enough about it, but one thing we know is that it spreads very quickly, right? But there is no evidence so far to say that it is more virulent than the earlier viruses that were available.
But isn't there sufficient evidence that says that it kills younger people more than
it affects the younger people, but the number of mortality has not really gone up that much. It does affect because that is part of the mutant. Now, when you talk of all these things, could I take you back to 1918 Spanish flu, right? That was called Spanish flu, but that was a misnomer. It never originated in Spain, but it is because Spain was a country which had independent free media that they were able to report on this. So the whole thing was put on Spain and they labeled it as Spanish flu. But actually I think there's some evidence that it actually originated in the United Kingdom. But what I'm trying to say is not about the name. Spanish flu affected, I think, something like 500 million people all over the world. I think that at that time it was about 1/3 of the population of the world, right? It killed something between 20 to 50 million people, right? Then that was in 1918. The major brunt of the attack of the virus was in that. 1 year later, right, it just disappeared. There were no vaccines, there was no antiviral drugs, but it just disappeared. Why? Scientists are not sure about this at all, but what they feel is that either it killed the affected people or it produced herd immunity in the others who are affected. So that happens, that can happen with the mutant strains as well. So that we are talking now of a very virulent type of virus.
But doctor, are we to really draw parallels with something that happened in 1918?
No, but then we have even added advantages now, because we have a vaccine. Although I'm not saying that that is the end all for everything. It's not an end game for the thing, because remember two things. We still don't know enough about this virus. Then second, we still don't know enough about the vaccine as well, right? There are several vaccines, and don't forget that in the research and development component of any drug or a vaccine, the standard time that it takes for all the evaluations, everything to be made and the vaccine to be made and released can go up to about 15 years, right? And the average is thought to be around 10 years. Now here we have produced a vaccine in 10 months. So
Mangal, I think you can speak a little bit about research as well, because you are a visiting lecturer at one of the state universities in the island, and Professor Sumitipala spoke about how important research is. In your opinion, when these indigenous tonics are coming out, when focus is on all this and more, how important is research to make sure that we administer the Sri Lankan citizenry with the right vaccine, or even if it's an indigenous medication that is supposed to be on a rollout for the country?
Sure. That's totally the different the scenario. Like you are putting me to the different segment of my purview.
Yeah.
It's fine, but I think in terms of research, scientific research, and how one thing could be qualified for people to use, is enough explanations made in terms of the Western oriented. But what I feel, it's again without having that particular the producers or the segment of people who introduce such alternative method of improving the immunity of the population. So we need to have them also in the forum for us to have.
So I will ask you very
the productive
I'll
dialogue.
rephrase my question.
Productive dialogue. But what I feel while listening to all these the explanation, why not we do not promote developing the immunity system, and always the media and the public health discourse is talking about refrain from the behaviors which damages the internal immunity system of the human being. So which is about alcohol and tobacco, the use of alcohol and tobacco. So why not that is being taken into consideration in the public health forum, and the media can take that and have that also on board for people to make them much convinced on the behavioral changes.
So you're trying to say that the government should ban all the liquor shops
in order to
selling tobacco at the moment,
but,
and one of the main causes of revenue is going to be hampered.
What is being widely pronounced in this forum is protect the immunity and develop the immunity.
No,
So
I'll ask you a very easy question.
Yeah, that is the main weapon.
So if
which
you are given
can
an
develop
opportunity
against the virus,
if you're given an opportunity to test something for yourself, what would that be? Would it be an indigenous medication that has not have had any research done, or would it be a vaccine that has gone through the research phases?
You see, it's based on evidences. It's based on evidences. What I can really rely on the evidences.
So what would it be right now if you are given an opportunity?
By considering all these, the
Expert
fact that
view.
we discuss, still we are on the fence. We can't rely on even on the vaccine which is being introduced widely, or any other the tonics or whatever this indigenous things that is being the publicized in the public.
So,
we have to
yes.
wait. I think considerable time period is required.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I just mention something
Yeah.
about this vaccine? Because people believe very commonly that now that we are talking of about 3 or 4 vaccines that are around, available, and claim to give you something like 95% protection, right? Do you know how many compounds have actually originated and started to be tested? It's something like something close to 200.
320, sir.
Right?
320, sir.
Maybe more, but out of that I think a lot was weeded off
Yes, sir.
initially, and then they started to hit. Now we got about maybe 4 or 5. I think another about 20 are in clinical
Third
trial
phase.
stage. So you will suddenly find within the next 6 months or so many different vaccines that will be available for the populace of the entire world. So you will have to have ways and means of deciding which one you have to select.
Right. So
Now-
I want to take this conversation.
Can I make another point on this one? So being the health promoter, right? Now we were talking about HIV, and what was introduced for the prevention. It is entirely the precautions and not the vaccine, but how this Sri Lankan community been protected and entire world, the population been protected without contracting HIV. So it's precautions. That is the healthy behavior of the public that can be developed by communicating behavioral change communication.
So in other words, you're saying,
in other words,
you're saying no point of pointing a finger at the government. The people have to take the onus, and they have to be responsible and take action to prevent the disease spreading.
They have a big role to play.
Yeah, so it's a bigger process. So the government alone can't do this, but the people have to support them. But the responsibility of us as the health profession is to do the best for our people, and we have proven track record that we don't follow everything that is being given up from the developers. Yeah.
Even when it came to the dengue vaccine in 2017, the government took a firm decision not to bring it down to Sri Lanka, because more people were more people were dying as a result of the vaccine being injected in the Philippines. Understood, there is no problem with that, Dr. Patharina, but taking proactive action is important, isn't it?
Absolutely. But at any point we can't do any harm. Do no harm comes first. So we have to ensure that our population is our responsibility. See, in 1980s, everybody wanted to introduce a concept called like trained birth attendants to the world. Right? And then Sri Lanka said no. Like even the WHO wanted to do that, we said no, we are going to stick with our public health midwives. Yes. And today they are taking it as a prime example of how a strong country took a decision that turned out so well that we have the lowest maternal mortality rate in the whole Southeast Asian region. Compared to the investment on health, I would say we are the most efficient country in the world in terms of kick per buck.
There is no second word about the role of the military in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
They have done a tremendous job thus far. There is no question about the role of the health professionals in Sri Lanka. They have done and are in the front line even as we speak at present. So there is no question about that. But the question is, are we acting proactively.
Absolutely.
In a situation like this.
Yes, because you can't see what's going on behind the scenes. There are 4 committees that have been approved, like top level people who have been managing this country for this long.
So I can give you a classic example.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the burial issue that is concerning the minorities in Sri Lanka. We saw the Sri Lanka Medical Council issuing a statement saying there is no harm. Medical Association and you have individuals, organizations coming out and saying there is no harm, and we have seen experts like Professor Malik Peiris, virologist, Professor Vitarana. Then we had the HIV/AIDS specialist on our show, who was who is the Secretary General of the Communist Party, saying there is no issue. Where is proactive action there?
So the thing is, the medical fraternity, what we can do is give our medical opinion, because this is, see, the burial is not a medical issue, it's more of a social issue.
Yeah, but the problem is, Dr. Patrina, I am telling you this not because of anything else, but the statement that was issued by one of the ministers, state ministers, saying medical experts can say whatever they want, but the decision at the end of the day lies with the government. Now that is a very demanding statement. That is a very threatening statement. That statement goes a long way in the hearts and minds of the Sri Lankan community at large.
That's where our power stops. So what we can do as the medical fraternity is to evaluate the evidence and give our opinion.
But is that a fair statement? When experts are giving their opinions,
that's where we
is
say
that a fair
no
statement?
opinion on that.
I have opinion on it.
Yeah, so of course, because you are the chairman of the National Institute of Fundamental Studies, and also psychiatry of in the University of Kiel in UK. What is your opinion? I want to hear your opinion.
Okay, I am somebody who fought for dignified burial post tsunami, because our dead bodies were dumped in mass graves, which reminded us of Chemmini mass grave and Suryakanda. So at that time, I personally requested, the current Prime Minister was the Prime Minister at that time, we gave a dignified burial. There's no question about dignified burial. But remember here, there is a divided opinion. Again, evidence, you know, some people say this, some people say that. So it's divided. There are pros and cons in everything. But what I'm against is, I'm against any negative discrimination as well as positive discrimination. Let's talk about burial, taking away the political color, language, religion. If it is burial, burial for everybody. If it is cremation, based on scientific evidence, that. If it is harmless, it's a choice. Nobody should force. What I see right now.
Where is the choice here?
Choice, it has to be a decision by the state backed on evidence, but again the scientific community is divided. That's the whole thing. Medical fraternity say one thing, the earth scientists say another thing. The issue here is
but who should decide that?
Let me finish, please.
Yeah.
The issue here is, I see now at the very beginning the government took a decision based on limited evidence, right? So again, if there is evidence of no damage by burial, that can be done. But if there is a slightest doubt, there are still ways of doing it. For example, if you go deeper down the water level, cover it with a cover and make concrete, you know, bunkers like they put it, but who take the extra cost? Remember, all these decisions, there are social, financial, economical, psychological. It's what I'm trying
Professor,
to say.
I understand what you're saying now. You spoke about in your opening remarks, you said about social stigma.
Yes.
You spoke about why people are not coming to do PCR tests.
Yes.
And this is one of those reasons.
Part of it,
at least one of the reasons.
Don't generalize it, because...
No, but one of it. As a result of that,
agree.
You can give an example, the people of Atulagama are not coming to do PCR tests because they fear.
I do agree. So it's the responsible...
They will be cremated.
Yeah, it's when it comes to one particular community, burial within a day is acceptable, but not cremation, right? But when it comes to Sinhala Buddhist majority, cremation is accepted, but they want to go through the grief process 3 days. So whatever you do, there are pros and cons for some group. But remember, in this country...
No, but this is what you spoke about earlier.
I'm still talking about it. What I'm saying is, it's a complex, difficult decision. In this country, We have not seen the bodies of 60,000 people who died in 1988. We have not seen even the bodies to grieve who died in the process of 35 years. I am not saying death is a difficult thing for people who are living. We should try and ease out the grief process.
But are we reflecting on the past? Are we reflecting on the past and not doing the right thing in the present?
The right thing is a difficult choice. I am for it. What I am trying to say, I don't say it's only cremation, only burial, but I don't say it's only burial or cremation based on the language or the religion. Take it off. Take a decision, and that decision, if any particular person, irrespective of that, you can do something like this. Now in Britain, there's a thing called advance directive. If I want, I can make my last will, right? I'm pretty sure in this country, there will be different people of different faiths saying, if cremation is the best for my people, my nation, my country, do it. But the problem here is political incitement, either side, I'm not taking one side. People are taking political mileage from this, and some of the demonstrations are organized. That's what I hate. We have seen the Jaffna library being burnt, and that escalated into ethnic violence, which took us for 35 years of war. I don't want to see that. I was personally affected in 1980.
Won't that ethnic divide happen here as well, as stated by Minister of Justice Ali Sabri?
I don't want to comment on individuals. I only believe in processes, and any decision taken will have advantages and disadvantages. We have to handle it with care and sensitivity and do best, while trying to console people, explain. Here the issue is, as I said, risk communication and lack of proper
But we are
dialogue.
talking about ethics over and over again, Professor. So where is the ethics here?
Ethics here is I'm talking about public health ethics. It's good that
so where is that here?
I'll tell you. I mean, this is.
I want to know where ethics.
I'll tell you. This is ethics document. Ethics in epidemics, emergencies, disasters, research, surveillance, and patient care, which came out, about 7-8 years ago. I have contributed to that. Ethics, generally public health ethics is for greater good. That's the basic fundamental principle. So and that's where we need to think of what is good for the majority. But majorities, I'm not talking about Sinhalese. No, I'm not talking about Sinhala Buddhist majority. I'm talking about
that's very subjective.
The majority of Sri Lankans. Majority of Sri Lankans. That's what I'm standing for. And it's a difficult decision. We have to go through difficult decisions, discuss, communicate, convince, and come to a compromise solution that will. Here the issue is
but
lack
not
of
with the government who's hell-bent, who's saying that they will disregard whatever the medical experts are saying, and the decision only lies with them at the end of the day. Such a statement is not.
Not only the medical expert. I don't think it should be only the medical experts.
Yeah, but only what the minister said was, the state minister said was, the expert committees in question can recommend whatever they want. However, the decision at the end of the day lies with the government.
But it's not my statement.
No, it's not your statement. Absolutely, Professor. I agree with you. But you're talking about ethics. I think the document that you showed right now was about epidemics and emergency situations. But that does not even deal with the pandemic, because
it does. Yeah. I mean,
but right at the start, it doesn't speak about the pandemic. It says
disasters. Pandemic word is not there. Pandemic is an epidemic. So
epidemic is the primary version of it. Pandemic is something that is amongst communities, beyond boundaries. So that doesn't even speak about it, because the last time we saw a pandemic was in 1918, the Spanish flu, as Dr. Pereira pointed out, where the origins of the Spanish flu is known to be probably China, France, the US, and also Britain, as you mentioned. So still for all, we've not found out the real cause. So in a situation like that, what is the role of the government? What is the role of the citizenry? What is it?
The role of the government is to lead, and it's when you say the government, it's not only the governing political party.
No, of course, it's everyone who's having a position. I think even Dr. Patran is responsible, because he's affiliated to a government body. Mangra Randenia, who's sitting here today, he's also representing the government somewhat, because he's the media spokesperson of the Sri Lanka Foreign Employment Bureau. You, Professor, you are involved with a few committees in the governance structure in the country as well right now. Dr. B.J.C. Pereira, who was once the president of the Sri Lanka Pediatric Association, as well as the Sri Lanka president of the Sri Lanka Medical Association. People are looking at you all right now to take the right decision. And where is that decision coming? Where is civil society playing a role here?
So I think, like, from the medical fraternity, those opinions have been very well expressed. So I represent the College of Community Physicians, and we have drafted our response on
what is the response? So the public knows.
So
we know the SLMA issued a statement recently about
so that's the thing.
What is your statement?
So it's a two-page document that weighs in the pros and cons and tells the scientific stand because we told them, like, right now.
What is scientific standing?
Sorry?
What is the scientific standing?
The scientific standard is right about the available evidence, and we have said, look, these are the pros and cons of this decision, because no one can say for certain, okay, this is, because that's not my specialty at all, right? So it has to be a virologist and people who are experts in that who have to make the decision. So actually I will encourage people to actually read the document. That's one perspective from the College of Community Physicians, that they have expressed this is our opinion. So likewise the College of Pathologists have I think a divided decision. So likewise there are different entities who are looking at it in from different points, and the final decision, because I told you this is a social issue as well, because see, if one group starts asking, okay, we also have to practice our the rituals that have been, to keep it at home, and then do this and that.
Even others like Christians, even the Buddhists have said that they have not even had the opportunity to do the Pansukula ritual, which is one of the rituals that is conducted as the final rites on a dead body. Even that has not been given to them. So we are not even talking about the burial issue, we are talking about a spectrum of issues that affects different social strata, different social segments in the country as well.
Yes.
So everyone is deprived of it. Why? I can give you a classic example, Dr. Patirana. This is not the first time. During the Yahapalne government, which came into power, weedicides overnight was banned. Glyphosate was overnight banned. Why? Because certain individuals, illogical people, thought that weedicide was harmful. And as a result of that, the Japanese government, we lost tea exports to Japanese market amounting to approximately 4 million kilograms as a result of that. Is this also such a decision? Now that is the problem.
So that's why I say, so for the medical fraternity, the distance that we can go is scientific. We can't get into politics and the social issues. So see, we are not giving opinions. We are presenting scientific evidence, and based on that we give our opinion on the matter.
So then who takes the final decision?
It's the whole of government. That's why we have a health minister.
Now, so everyone gives opinions. Everyone gives opinions. Now you just mentioned that the Community Physicians Association gave an opinion. The Sri Lanka Medical Association gave an opinion. The government has established certain committees to give opinions. So all the opinions are in the government's court right now, or the ball is in the government's court. Now, who is going to take the decision? Is it the majority view that is going to succeed?
In democracy, people have appointed a set of people. We have a legislature and we have the parliament.
Don't talk about the legislature. Unfortunately, Dr. Patran, we are a country. There are 145 members in the elected government. There are other people who cross over for whim and fancy of the other people to make sure that they can pass a 20th amendment to a constitution. Unfortunately. So that is the democracy that we are sitting in right now.
So the position is, so the doctors are nothing more powerful than that. So the law of the country stands above everyone else. We give our opinions, and finally for it to become the law of the land, it has to go through the process and be, to be given to the people. What we can do as the medical fraternity is to go up to that level of scientific evidence, and beyond that, it's the law of the land.
Professor Atula, do you think that the decision is taking a bit too long? Because last week we had the same conversation, and here we are, 2021, New Year, still no decision. 1 week after, we are still talking about it. We are still in the process of deciding based on the evidences. The decision is taking too long.
A bit more to challenge, I'm going to ask you a question. You said, certain rituals are not being allowed. We need to take the body home. Where do we stand? remember, moral rights and wrongs, which is ethics, is not universal. The West talk about individual rights, whereas our part of the world, we talk about collective rights. And this is complex. So my view in this is, COVID is a complex, new challenge for the whole world. We can't expect simple solutions that will satisfy everybody. There will have to be difficult decisions taken at times for the greater good. That's where I stand.
Professor, you mentioned choice in this matter.
Absolutely.
And in your opinion, whose choice is it? Is it the state's choice, or is it the close relatives or the close ones of the deceased choice, or the deceased choice?
I mean, if you give a wider choice, the ultimate choice should be person. Say like if there is government take a decision, either cremation or burial, then that should be the final decision, should be the person irrespective of the religious belief. Nobody should, pressurize and say this is my choice. If that freedom is given, that's fair enough. So that's where I stand for. So language, religion, irrespective of that.
One more question relating to the same thing. Part of the committees you've been have been discussing about this vaccine. Some of the committees you've been in, and one of the stances of the authorities was that we will wait for WHO approval, which has been given, and now we are slowly considering those as well. When it comes to the advice on prevention of the spreading of the virus, things like wearing a face mask, things like social distancing, when the WHO recommends those things, we are following it, correct? Professor? We are following those, yeah. When it comes to the treatment of the patient, when it comes to the kind of treatment that needs to be given, the WHO has conveyed a certain set of guidelines, a certain set of advisories, and those are also being followed by our hospitals to the letter in order to make our patients better, correct? Why is it that if you are following all this advice from the WHO, when it comes to the disposal of bodies, there is a problem?
WHO is very clear on that. They say individual countries have the right to decide. Now remember, even the WHO, you asked me a question, I'll answer it. WHO at the very beginning said not to wear masks. Then they later changed. That's the nature of this challenge. Social distancing is a wrong word. They corrected it, but we didn't pick up on it. It's physical distancing. We are not socially distant. Our nation has never been socially distant. Socially connected. So misnomers, misdefinitions, misinformation, and WHO, yes, we accept those standards, but we are not bound. We are not bound. We are a sovereign country. We can't be, we have been put on pressure by Western nations for many different things. We have stood as a nation. My plea is, forget about religion, forget about the language you talk. We are one united country. We have to face it together and face the consequences. That's the only way out. I am totally against, because I have been a victim of this terrible polarization politics. So therefore, I don't want to see that happening in this country, whichever the quarter it comes from. We have to fight for one nation, and respecting the rights of the majority as well as the minority, and no strata of the society should be negatively discriminated, at the same time positively discriminated. That's where I stand.
But there has to be logical thinking for any decision that has to be made.
Absolutely.
So that has to be based on science, that has to be made on evidence, that has to be based on research.
Plus greater good, particularly in pandemic situation.
Yeah. But now that is the three things the government has missed out on when they endorsed the indigenous tonic, when they took decisions based on other matters in terms of COVID-19.
Repeat it. I lost it.
So, so in terms of research, in terms of scientific evidence, in terms of getting your decisions right, to be logical, all these three things are very important, isn't it? When decisions are being made for the greater good of the nation. Am I right, Professor?
Absolutely.
Right. So having said that, when the indigenous tonic came into play, the health minister consuming it, giving her a partial nod to the tonic, saying I also consumed it, when other countries, individuals, state heads were getting vaccinated from may it be Pfizer, may it be AstraZeneca, may it be Sputnik, may it be the Chinese vaccine or the vaccines that have been already come about. Is that the way to go about?
No, I'll tell you, I'm very clear on it, it's not.
Right, thank you very much.
However, the issue here is, we can't dismiss the indigenous knowledge, the traditional medicines. I'm totally for researching those, but the issue is overemphasizing things. Now, to give you an example, because you brought up, I don't like to talk about this particular thing. Say even if that tonic was effective, the crowd gathered in Kegol, 10,000 people. If there were 10 COVID patients, there would have been another cluster, right? So that's where I am against. I am not against. I mean, we need to, I'm a researcher. I don't dismiss anything without evidence or agree anything on evidence, but I'm 100%
agree without evidence.
Sorry?
Agree without evidence, not on evidence.
Yeah, agree without evidence or disagree without. So, if somebody claims something, it can be tested, I mean, science.
No, the problem is, Professor, this came out to be a varama or a warrant from God.
I said no comments, but I'll tell you one thing.
Because you can't hide under that fact, because now that is what was brought into play.
I'll tell you, I don't believe in it. I don't believe in it. But let's accept.
That is the bottom line.
No, let's accept this. There are people who believe different things. People go, when you are stuck with something without a solution, people go to Kataragama, people make vows, that's part and parcel of the culture. So while I don't agree with something, I also respect the people who believe it, even though I disagree. But unfortunately, some of those people, I'll be very honest with you, certain people approach me and ask me not to talk about all this. I said no. I will express my views, opinions, at the same time respecting people who have different views. In fact, some people have asked me not to talk about ethics. I'll finish with your permission, just repeating this. To me, as much as research, I am firmly, committed to ethical research. This is again, people talk about Oxford vaccine. This is about Oxford textbook on ethics, which I contributed to a chapter, and I'm quoting something from New England Journal. One reason clinical courts are vocal about investigators' primary obligation to care for human subjects of their research is the strong temptation to subordinate the subject's welfare to the objectives of the study. That is particularly likely when the research question is extremely important and the answers would probably improve the care of future patients substantially. In those circumstances, it is sometimes argued explicitly that obtaining a rapid, unambiguous answer to research question is the primary ethical obligation. With the most altruistic of motives, then researchers may find themselves slipping across the line that prohibits treating human subjects as means to an end. When that line is crossed, there is very little left to protect patients from callous disregard of their welfare for the sake of research goals, whether it's traditional medicine or Western medicine. If somebody brings Western medicine and say, I'll do a trial because this is, in my opinion will cure, I will be the first to stand against it. So it's not my allegiance to a particular system of medicine, it's my allegiance and commitment to the welfare of people.
So any questions, gentlemen, from the panelists? Tarusha?
But Professor, it's in the works. We are, I think, attempting to get a vaccine, and then probably it will arrive in Sri Lanka in March. So if that happens, 20% of the population is going to get the jab. So in plain terms, are you against it?
No.
Not at all.
No, why should I?
So if
I'm
you
for
realize
it.
about the strategy, it's called the COVAX strategy.
Yeah.
We
Yes.
are not the only country that's going to get 20%. There are 190 countries listed on it. So it's for equitable distribution of the vaccines, where currently we are having what is called vaccine nationalism, where the rich countries, they produce the vaccine and they don't give it out. So this COVAX is an allegiance of the Gavi and the WHO.
The intermediary.
Yeah, so they are basically funding in the money and trying to secure 2 billion vaccines so that they can distribute and get 20% of the people, irrespective of their affordability, to give it to the other countries. But Sri Lanka is willing to spend the full amount and get the 100% of it. So that's our stance. So we are not going to just rely on the 20% that will be given by the alliance, but the idea is to go for the 100% as soon as possible. Once we have established, the reports have been given by the scientific community, that's been evaluated, and once it's approved.
This is AstraZeneca that we are talking about.
Most
with regards
probably,
to the
because I think
logistics.
you might have heard our DGHS spoke about it. He said that's the most practical one in Sri
Yeah.
Lanka because the transport and the logistics will be much easier.
But there is a, remember, Chinese vaccine and a Russian vaccine, we don't hear very much. I don't want to talk too much about because it might sound negative. Vaccine is a business, remember that. And the West dominates it. But now in this situation, that's fine, it's coming here. But if we vaccinate, you open another can of worms, 20%. It's unethical. You need to vaccinate everybody. But where do we stand? So are we against vaccinating 20%? No. But remember why I said that. The AIDS vaccine was developed in South Africa because there were HIV patients. It was done, and the pharmaceutical companies wanted to go away from South Africa. The South African government put a rule, this, that. 39 pharmaceutical companies took the South African government to courts. They had to fight it to get the benefits of the people. Because this is a pandemic, this generosity is there. But remember, whether we like it or not, it's also a business. There are ethical issues. But I am fully supportive of the vaccines, not only for AstraZeneca or the Western ones. I am even supportive for the Russian Sputnik one.
Are you also supportive towards the
Chinese
the
vaccine?
herbal tonic also?
Not at the current state.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
If it
it is
passes
proven,
through the scientific process, and if it's a rigorous process, if he can make it through, that means yes. But right now, no.
Right now, no.
That's my belief, because I'm a scientific person who has studied the Western way of treating. So that's my belief that you have to go through this rigorous process in order to get it certified. But that's my personal opinion. See, medicine is not only the culture plays a major role. People have the freedom of choice. Our people think differently, but that's something beyond our control.
But according to the inventor of this so-called tonic, he has distributed among more than 2 million people in Sri Lanka.
What can we do? Freedom of choice, as you spoke.
Democracy.
Democracy.
So we need to go for a short commercial break, gentlemen. But before we go for a short commercial break, a very quick question to Mangala Randhaniya, Deputy General Manager and Media Spokesperson of the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment. Mangala, what steps will the government take now, at least, to bring down the 60,000 Sri Lankan expats who are stranded overseas? What is the mechanism that the government has in place?
The steps, of course, still being the same steps being carried out, but what we are thinking of expediting and getting the crowd more than 500 per day. If we can improve it to double, like 1,000 per day, depending on the government quarantine and the paid quarantine facilities available in the country, under the health guideline given for the paid quarantine also, because there is a strict rules and regulations introduced by the health sector to the paid quarantine places, hotels. So those facilities to be expanded, and then we can only take more people back to our country. The other thing, what we have requested our contract over employees through the system of deploying the workers, like the receiving organization and agencies and the employers of destination countries, to give an extra extension for the workers who are willing to extend their contract, so that they can delay their returning back to our country, and that is being presently carried out. Some of the willing people, they have obtained their the contract extension and they are waiting, and then once the situation comes to normal in the country, like the airport operations come in at least to a 50% level, so that people can come, I think after March, maybe more people can come to our country. But as per the priority list prepared at the embassies of destination countries, the priority is given for the most wanted people to come back to their home places.
But the government knows now where the people are stranded. Example, most of them at GCC countries, right, Mangan?
Of course, 41,000 over there, and majority are at their own workplaces, but they have given their consent through the system that they want to come back. But there are the people who are in detention camps and the safe houses, and some of the locations where we have provided for these people to wait temporarily, those who do not have the permanent workplaces.
So what happens to those who have not registered, who have gone on visit visa and who are stranded?
Everyone is provided